Excellent. Doesn't sound so like it is from this side. I'm Sharyn Rundle-Thiele. It's not? Yep. Try that. I'm Sharyn Rundle-Thiele from Griffith University. Welcome tonight. I'm going to serve as your MC, so occasionally we'll just keep us all organised. My biggest job serving as MC is to try and make sure that we stay on time. So welcome everybody. It's great to have you here. I would like to start by just acknowledging the traditional owners and acknowledging all leaders, past, emerging, present and future. The land was here long before us, and when you think about Indigenous and their ability to be custodians of the land, they talk about the world before concrete and glass. And it's a really interesting way, I think, sometimes to reflect on all the environmental challenges and issues that we're actually talking about. So when I pay my respects, I can't stand here talking about which country. I've got a lot of learning and work to do to get way in front of that, and I apologise for just not even being quite close there yet. But my work teaches me that we have so much to learn, and we need to go backwards and really reflect and just look heavily at where we've gone wrong. Now, through tonight, those of you that are happy to use a bit of technology, if a question comes to mind as your speakers start talking, put it into the Slido for us, so you just enter your question there. Towards the end tonight, we will actually have a question and answer session with the whole panel, and so they will actually get through as many of the questions that we can. And one of the things our team also does in the background is if there are any last unanswered questions because time gets tight, is that we then take them back, get the answers we need, and get that information back up and out there. So do know that you will actually get most of the questions actually answered. It might just be that sometimes we can't even answer some of those questions, or we've just got too many. So I'm going to, with no further ado, hand over to Ralph, who's going to be our first speaker for tonight. And he's from the ACT government, and Ralph's going to talk a little bit about what they've been up to.
Thank you, Sharyn. Thanks very much, Sharyn, and my pleasure to be here. So, yes, I'm with the ACT government. I'm the ACT Healthy Waterways Program Manager, which means I'm a very lucky person. I get to run a team that is trying to figure out what some of the solutions are to the chronic water quality problems that we have in some of our lakes and ponds, and rural rivers for that matter. So just before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land, and also recognize other families with connections to the land, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and also recognize the continuing culture, there we go, the continuing culture that the local custodians bring to the Canberra region. So let me just give you some background to why we're here tonight and why the Leaf Collective really matters. Really simply, stormwater in Canberra has very high levels of nutrients. And at high concentrations, these plant nutrients are not polluting unless they're in high concentrations. If they're in low concentrations, the plants take them up and there's no issue. They become pollution when in high concentrations, they cause problems, like blue-green algal blooms. So we're trying to improve water quality quite simply by doing two things: preventing pollution and implementing these nature-based solutions that help to mitigate the water quality problems. That's probably what we're best known for. We build these water quality assets, these wetlands and rain gardens and things. That's probably what you know us for. We also, in fact, as you might hear later, I'm not sure, we've had some great researchers from University of Canberra working on looking at some of the in-lake competitors to algae, seeing whether they are part of the solution. So I just want to talk a little bit, even though we're actually mainly here about preventing pollution, I want to talk about these other solutions and why they come, and then circle back and say why the Leaf Collective matters. So we know that we can compensate for increasing pollution by building these nature-based solutions. They're nature-based because they've got plants in them, all right? They're not just pipes and drains. They've got plants that are doing the work, the filtering the water and cleaning it. So that picture, that too small picture, shows water coming from one of the constructed wetlands in Belconnen, linking back with Ginninderra Creek. And if you squint hard, you can see the water coming from the wetlands quite clear, and the water from the creek is quite turbid. So that water, that's where the water came from, is that creek, and you can see the stuff that's getting returned is quite clear. Those things work. They're really good at their job. The trouble is this, and this is some of the findings of the UC research that Rod's going to talk about later. Lake Tuggeranong receives around 5 times the amount of nutrients every year as is needed for an algal bloom. It's an estimate, but what we know is it's receiving a lot of nutrient, okay? Most of this is coming in storm flows. Why is that a problem? Storm flows come, they fill up our water quality assets, and then once they're full, if the water needs to percolate through them and get cleaned. So anything that's past that full mark goes right past the wetland, okay? So some of the pollution is bypassing our big, large, our large water quality assets, or our large wetlands. The other problem is 50% of that pollution is dissolved. So you have dissolved forms, and then you have stuff that's adhered to soil particles and leaves and grass, organic matter, coarse stuff, particulate stuff. Why is that a problem? Because these wetlands are better at dealing with the particulate pollutants than they are the dissolved pollutants. They are a better filter for particulate stuff. And we've also learned that the pollution is coming from across the catchment. We call that diffuse. It's coming from everywhere. So what is everywhere? Everywhere is houses. Everywhere is roads. Everywhere is a sewer network, which I didn't put in there. And almost everywhere in Tuggeranong are actually playing fields. Okay, so all of those are suspects when we go and look at what the source of nutrients is. So we're trying to look, we're investigating, I'm not, Rod is, as you'll hear about in a little while, is investigating the sources of this pollution. Is it leaves in the gutter? Is it grass in the gutter? Is it fertilizer use in our gardens? So in summary, the source of the water quality problem is too much pollution, too much runoff, which I'm not going to talk about tonight, and not enough filtration. We're not able to put enough filtration in the catchment. Well, potentially not able to, certainly not cheaply, put enough filtration into the catchment, filtration in terms of wetlands and things, to mitigate the poor water quality problem and protect the receiving waters, the lakes, from getting blue-green algal blooms. So in summary, pollution of the catchments is one of the drivers of the algal bloom in Lake Tuggeranong, algal blooms in Lake Tuggeranong, and enrichment elsewhere. If you live up in Yarrabee or in the Yarrabee Pond catchment and you like walking around Yarrabee Pond, it's got a lot of macrophyte growth, and that some people don't like that. The important thing with that is algal blooms are not just a natural consequence of being here, being Tuggeranong, and being Lake Tuggeranong. There is a pollution problem as well as an urban design problem. Expensive wetlands, and they are expensive, rain gardens, everything are necessary. Why are they necessary? Because we will never be able to get rid of all the pollution. We're living in a city. There is pollution. We'll never get rid of all of it, so we will always need some wetlands and some rain gardens to help filter out the water. So they're necessary, but they are not sufficient. There is too much pollution moving through the system, and we've got to deal with it. A significant portion of that pollution is probably avoidable, and so everybody needs to help avoid that. That's government, businesses, gardeners, for instance, and residents. We all have a role to play. So the solution to the problem of Lake Tuggeranong must include a component of programs like the Leaf Collective, which are there to abate pollution. And again, that message, we all do. I know I'm with the government, and I bet I'll have a question about what we're doing with mowing grass into the Virgin area. Yes, we are part of the problem, and we are part of the solution. But residents are part of the solution as well. The Leaf Collective, at least this part of the Leaf Collective, is really about all of us and how we work in the catchment, including residents. And so I encourage you to back it. If you like it in pictures, where we need to go from is all these brown arrows or yellow arrows, which are representing pollution, and lots of it coming in from all over the catchment, to this situation. We're sure there's going to be some pollution. We're a city, sort of unavoidable. But if we can get to that, then we can start to control it through some of these filters in the catchment and things we do in the lake itself. So that's all I wanted to say. Sharyn, I believe, yeah.
Thanks, Ralph. So I don't think we even needed to have him on a timer. He was a very, very efficient speaker. So if anyone's got questions for Ralph online, in the room, please go to the Slido and place the questions there, because as I said, we'll start to take all of this at the end. Now, I have a second role tonight. I'm actually also your second speaker. So I'll speak a little bit more about this thing that Ralph's been talking about, the Leaf Collective. So I lead a team back at Social Marketing at Griffith, and today in the room we've got Brooklyn and Louisa with me helping today. So it's not just me, this is a whole team from Griffith University in Brisbane who were engaged by ACT government because there was a problem. And across that whole first run, I confess myself, I still didn't really understand what was going on. And by the second one, I really started to actually see it, that ultimately there's just too much phosphorus ending up in the lake. That was connected to how the lakes are actually shut for 100 days. And for the first time, I could start to talk about it quite simply and to start to realise that when the scientists are talking and telling you that there's runoff and there's pollutants and things, the leaves themselves actually are basically genius. They've been created to hold all of this goodness. Now, the autumn leaves, when they drop, they're totally wired to just let it go and fast. So they'll drop 50% of their load on the first time they ever get wet. So those rain events kind of matter because they're sitting there ready to just let that phosphorus go. And then, of course, they hold the rest of it over time until they hit the waterway and truly break down. So if you're a composter, you actually can use them to your best advantage because they break down super fast and they're great brown matter. Then you don't get smelly compost. So this has taken me on a journey. I knew none of this, much like most of the residents I speak to, and even indeed this afternoon speaking to Steve, who is a principal at a high school that has actually installed our very first leaf tower that looks like a teapot. So if you go driving next week to Cornwall High School, it's going to be sitting there right out the front. Now, Steve said to me, I haven't heard about the Leaf Collective. A lot of other people standing there today had, because we've been going at it a little bit harder than ever before. But when I first started speaking to people here in Canberra, no one knew that leaves were litter. We all thought they were good things. They're natural, they break down. But the problem is, if they're left in the wrong spot, they're doing a lot of harm. So we have to look at them now and say, leaves are litter. So my numbers here aren't exactly correct. I'm missing at least one survey, so I know we're somewhere above 2,000 residents who've basically answered our team at some point in time as we got on with the job of learning what is it that Canberrans want? What do you support? What do you actually want to see? So it's working with residents themselves, hearing about street sweepers and they don't come often enough, hearing about the grass clippings, and indeed myself having a very cheeky moment of going, why not film it? Because I got to see it myself too. I nearly got beaten up. But it is a real important thing to talk about, that yes, street sweepers potentially could come more often, but we're also learning there's problems associated with that. The leaves left on the road might have too many particles. Do we know what's wrong with all of this? So this is a really complex problem, and it's worth having these hard conversations about how else and what else can we actually do about it. So our team has combed across the planet looking for ideas. That's how we found the leaf tower that looks like a teapot. So now we've actually realised it, and finally, more than 3 years later, we've actually got a real one to actually show you. So we've actually gone looking to understand who's tackled water quality issues like this, whether it be the grass clippings, leaves. Funnily enough, you don't get much on eucalypt leaves overseas. They don't really exist, so we can't actually get too much expert opinion from that. We have to learn it ourselves the first time. So that gives us great ideas, and we run them by residents to see what people actually want to see here. We also talk to experts. Now, it's the experts who teach people like me, who are definitely not a hard scientist, how to actually start to see the problem so that I can actually connect enough with people just to the level they want to, because not everyone wants to know all of that detail. And so we have to kind of almost get out there and strike the balance and find the sweet spot, giving those that want really deep information a lot, and just everyone else a quick call to action. This is what we need you to actually do. We talk to stakeholders. Will they support it? Is it possible? Because if stakeholders won't support it, I might as well go home and give up. And then, of course, there's the co-design itself. This is where we get people into the room, and those people tell us what they actually want to see happen. Now, my world of co-design is 90 minutes with people who've never thought about leaves before. They've never thought about any of this stuff. They're just any person out there that sort of opts in to help us. Some will come in with like very detailed knowledge, and we show them idea cards. So they've seen various things like our teapot leaf tower. They might have seen garden, a drop to drain, different promotional approaches, but they're also free to discard all of that. So co-design is about getting a very clear blank sheet of paper, or in the online world, an online blank sheet, and people start talking. And you force them to get into a small group, and usually it's got 3 or 4 people, and those 3 or 4 people have to come up with ideas that would work for them and other people like them. So it's already a negotiated process. You basically have to sit there, argue it out, and so I have watched some teams get very, very, let's say, argumentative, and others who just agree right from the start. And so they'll argue until they finally arrive at what their solution might be. So behind me there are so many of the great ideas that I've seen. Now, what I do, because I'm just practical and I have to start somewhere, is I get the really, really long list, and it's like a massive shopping list of these are all the things community want us to do. But we start at the top, so the ideas that come up the most. And so this is from the very first run. It ran in autumn 2022. Basically, community had said to us outright, we need help. Like, how do we compost? What should we do? We need to be told that leaves are doing harm. We need incentives. Like, some people actually like a bit of a, what's in it for me? So we kind of got on with going, well, what might some of those reasonable incentives be? Some people were happy to adopt a drain or a tree. Some said, can you just make it easy? Like, can someone else come and pick it up for me? I don't want to do it, and I'm happy to pay someone to do it. So let's try that. Let's see what people think. People have talked about we need leaf collection events and more. The list literally goes on. So these are just some of them and not all. And so far across 3 different runs of 6 weeks, we've been testing the various ideas that people told us they wanted to see. You tell me you want to adopt a tree or a drain, then I'm going to come up with a way that you can do that. And so you can see there the map and just how many trees and drains have been adopted around Canberra. People have sent in photos, they've shown us what they've done, they talk to us about the amount of leaves that they actually are collecting from their drains. I've had pictures, the before and the after of the drains. So amazing things that we actually see. We've been handing out free leaf bags. These are by far our most popular thing, and it's almost something that Leaf, I think, is now increasingly been known for. And it's been so popular on the 2nd and the 3rd runs that they've sold out. We help people how to get a green bin, because funnily enough, sometimes government websites aren't so easy to navigate. People didn't even still know they were a thing, despite all that the government is actually trying to do. We've created drop-off points. Can we bring some easier option for some people? They don't want to drive the other half an hour across town. Could it pop up in a suburb near us? There is the online leaf tracker that you can actually see there. Who's picked up the most leaves, or at least who's reported that they've picked up the most leaves? We've tried scales, we've tried competitions, And of course, most recently, installing a leaf tower in a school community. So this is when we've been active. We've been out in autumn of 2021. We backed up in summer and focused a little bit more on eucalypt to understand if there were any sensitivities around that. And then went a little bit harder, what I call the Go Harder campaign in autumn. Like, can we make sure that more people have actually seen leaf than just the approaches that we had previously? Because at that point in time, you either saw us through a newsletter, someone talked about us, or you might have found us on sort of social media and Facebook. Well, this time it's been driving past you, they're everywhere. Now, I only hit Canberra today at about 11 o'clock. I have seen so many of these buses. Now, obviously, I know what I'm actually looking for. But this is a really important marketing tactic, because what it's actually doing is it's making sure that more people make the link. So all it's doing is building up the number of times people have actually seen this message to the point where we should very clearly see more and more people in this community starting to understand that leaves left in the wrong place are litter. Now, there's a really serious side to the work that I actually do. We have to actually track, have a look at how we actually go. And what this graph and data shows you is 3 different runs. So you're seeing what's actually happened across those 3 6-week periods. So in front of me, the number of leaf bags, check out how that exploded to the point where our suppliers actually couldn't supply it. The next bags arrive in Australia on about the 1st of July. We've had more people adopting trees and drains than ever before. The numbers are just scooting on up. We've also increased the number of people who are happy and willing to actually follow Brooklyn as she speaks on Facebook, and people talk to us through that channel all the time. We have more and more people coming into the website to get help on composting, gardening, advice. There's like 4 creative ways to use leaves. You can learn how to make a hanging basket from leaves. So rather than just soil, but how can we actually put leaves back into good use? And of course, there's this side that we actually have to do where we start to look at what people think. Now, this one is actually from the second run. Our results are pending. So on your seat, there's a flyer. Please take that. You fill out the survey and hand it to someone else and ask them to do it for us too. We have a really serious side. How well have we gone and how much more work do we actually need to do? But this is what we do. We've measured people and what they think before we ever started. And next week, the survey will be public on Monday as we kick off to check out how did this 6 weeks run. So this is the one bit where I really still can't quite tell you, other than what people have reported in the app, what's gone on. But soon we'll actually have that. So there's a really important point to what we're actually up to, and that is to change the way people think. And then over time, as we change those hearts and minds, and more people start to look at the leaves near the gutter, which my team at work now do. You know, on the weekend, I'll get I went to put the bin out, and they take a photo of their gutter, and now I've picked the leaves up and put them in. They live in Brisbane. So the other side that we do, other than the hard, what has actually changed, did it go the way we wanted, how well, what else can we do, is that we're obviously always listening. People are talking to us, they're telling us how they feel all of the time. Sometimes it's good, sometimes they tell us they're really unhappy. So we just keep on talking straight back, because I'm a very big promoter. Every complex problem like this is a true shared responsibility. We cannot just sit and look at government and say, you have to change it, because government uses our funds. And funds are finite, and there's got to be a balance in how we actually all tackle it. So listening is a really important part of what we do, and why each time we come back, we're talking and just constantly learning, because if there are things that people don't like, maybe we can fix them. But of course, what they actually usually do, and this is where I know generally we've got a good sign that things are going quite well, is that you basically just hear things like more. Could you please do this? Could you please? And we want more of this and more of that, and so on. Now, I said to you earlier, we get so many ideas. Like, I have to go back now across 3 runs and write a really long shopping list of what everybody has uniquely told us. We have a lot more we need to do. Schools need to go into competitions. We have a previous run where we did that, and it does get energy and it does get people excited. We'd love to work with the landscaping community to understand more about how else we can actually start to reshape just the very way gardens are designed. Tim will speak later, comes in behind me. He taught me about rain gardens. He also taught me that the way that we're maybe gardening is an artefact of things from overseas. Like we've bought very English ways of trying to actually garden in Australia, a country that is so dramatically different with its weather, that for me, who is actually quite a keen gardener, you suddenly realise, like, what are we doing? Some of this doesn't make sense. And he's not alone. There are many gardeners themselves who've taught me heaps across these years of campaigning. So there is a lot more to be done. But what we've aimed to do across these 3 groups of 6 weeks is bring in new ideas each time, test them with a really controlled sort of scientific approach to actually just ask the hard question, does this work? So thank you for listening to me. I'll only pop up now just to keep us on time, and I'm going to hand over to Tim. So any questions, please pop them into the Slido.
Good evening, thank you very much. The idea of competition sounds great. So competition between horticultural businesses to capture as much leaf as they can on the properties they're working on. Does that sound okay? Yep. Tilt it up. Yep. So my background is from some horticulture training and education. Then I've worked for 12 years with New Zealand High Commission and Calthorpe's House up on Mugga Way, and then 12 years at Arana School, where 13 hectare grounds, where I was managing the grounds and teaching agriculture to the students. And part of that process, or during that work, and the 04 Canberra fires, we got to a point of putting together a master plan and finding a really fantastic water harvesting idea that I'll get to if I manage to get through everything. And the success of that way of thinking. So I was going to do a brief history of the planet Earth since its formation 5,000 million years ago. But it started to get a bit manic, the amount of information in it. But we've got to this point in time now where the city and this lucky Canberra community has an urban forest strategy that we can work with. So we're living within a city that's part of a forest and the basis of a forest. Important things about forests are they're critical in the water cycle, critical in nutrient cycle, and especially carbon cycle. And healthy forest will have a healthy forest floor and forest litter. And sort of interesting that one of the products you buy from Cork Hills is forest litter. That's the sort of, a fond term, I think, for a lot of gardeners anyway. So all the time with working with the soil, working with nature, the soil wants to be covered. So you can have a lot of organic matter on the left, a lot of life in that soil, or on the right, you can see my foot down the bottom my toe down the bottom on the footpath, but the bare soil section there, and as soon as there's soil like that that's not covered, then it's hard, compact, runoff, no infiltration, and you could have a nature strip that's fairly barren and will decline further and sort of cycle down in its capacity, or a nature strip that's sort of bursting with as much organic matter but life in there as possible, and varieties, different species. And a critical part of managing that and encouraging the life is to be able to maintain the water. So I think the red lines sort of point out fairly well, but just a slight saucering of this nature strip with a with a slope towards the road so that water's caught before it runs down onto the road. So the whole nature strip's like a half a saucer. So that's sort of clear in how it works, how it looks. One of the properties I looked after quite a while ago in Harrison had a sort of more current water-sensitive urban design to the verge and the no gutter, so water can go off the asphalt. That's a catchment, fantastic. Slight problem with the ongoing maintenance and residents just not realising what small amount of maintenance or an eye for detail could do. So the bottom left here, you can see the line of gravel coming out. Well, that's straight away that tells my eye, and once you've thought about it, you'd see it as well. It tells me that that's where the water runs, and that's all the sediment that's left. The finer stuff's out towards the middle of the road, and the heavier stuff's down where the water runs faster. And the right-hand picture is what that whole sort of street looks like, where the grass is actually a bit higher than the concrete. Water just can't get onto the grass. So a slight bit of maintenance to dig out a little drain on the left here, dig out a little bit of patch of along the concrete so the water can get off the concrete and flow down towards the tree. Bit of a source around the tree, and then there's a water retention and some water can hold for that tree. These 2 or 3 trees that I'd done that around over one season. By the end of that season into the next autumn, you can see those 2 orange dots in the middle of the street. So they're retaining their leaves for longer, there's more leaf and there's more colour, which just means they look nicer as well. And then that's just a bit closer up to that corner. And then inner north suburbs, I think this puts me up pretty highly with the competition, but I'm harvesting as much leaf as I can off the road, back up into the nature strip, and aesthetics is really important, like the job's got to look good when you leave, so mowing up, getting mown as short as possible. And this high definition slow mo is actually beautiful. I can just sit and look at this all day. But the amount of carbon, the small particle size means that it will break down very quickly. Now, just off the record, as I might put a pinch of salt on my meal, a small amount of blood and bone on there will help the carbon and nitrogen lock up and bind together and support the microbe that are in that turf and sod to sort of pull the leaf down and then build up a much richer soil mass. Sorry? The height of the mower, now especially oak leaves will blow away as you do that to them. They're quite cardboardy. Another trick that I haven't got up here is to hose them all, get them all wet, and then they stick and bind, but they'll still chop up. So it's a bit like what you do with dry stuff in a kitchen whiz. You wet it and then it binds and chops up much better. But comes up to repeat mowing, can change direction, comes up to a really good finish at the end. And especially after 2 or 3 years of doing it, then the grass gets really thick, grows up through it. So mulching, mowing, yep. And the sad thing about that is it's a petrol one, but we're changing. Now the water harvesting project at Arana School basically is installing in a high density, high use area, the sort of costs work out. So it's a really good idea, but an artificial aquifer is built with the roof water feeding directly into it. The orange fence at the background there is this line along here. So the guys were working on that section. Sorry, I've just left my spot. The guys are working on that section of the trenching, and that's all put in before the landscape's put in on top, which you can see in these photos. There's a green cross and a red cross, show you where there's one of the trees was planted right next to the aquifer, and one of them was out in the open. You can all see that. And then at 5 years growth and 10 years growth, phenomenal difference. And the really big one, I'll just flick back to that map again. In the right-hand side of the screen there, where there's quite a bit of the water trenches, and that purple circle on the bottom, it's basically like a complete closed canopy in 10 years. And that's in a very high, like it's a high school area where boys are kicking balls and swinging off branches, and sort of pretty brutal to try and grow anything in. And that's those two trees being planted. Once the finished landscape, like this traditional landscape, is gone on top of all that trenching. Is it at 10 years the growth? You can see on the left-hand one with the red cross, you can see my little finger around the other side. The big one's over a metre around, and I don't know the numbers on it, but the amount of leaf cover is sort of exponential, the amount of cooling it would do. The reason we realised it worked so well, the three limitations on growth for plants is temperature, light and moisture, and that's over a year. So typically, as we get to September, October, the temperatures come up really good, everything's going like, yeah, good, there's groundwater, we've had rain, we can start growing, and a bit of hot, dry wind, and the moisture goes, and your growth potential dips straight away right down again. Even if you are irrigating, this could also be a 24-hour graph of daylight. Even if you are irrigating, then on a hot day, the plant might not be able to extract water from the clay. Clay doesn't release water very well, whereas washed river sand, which is in the trenches, it's readily available. And for all the gardening folk, can I just check how long I've got? All the gardening folk out there, there's a little sort of way of thinking that plants, I understand, plants can have feeder roots and drinking roots. And if you're wanting plants to grow really well, moisture's a higher limitation. Moisture's more of a limitation than any nutrient deficiency in general. And if you're putting on typically the white fertiliser is soluble, and it will, you spread it out, gets wet, it's straight away in the water molecules. And if you're using that heavily, or where it's not needed, you'll be putting, it's basically like if you've been for a run, done some exercise, you need a drink of water, and it's like having a Coke for us, for our body. So often plants will just need water, not a salty solution which they have to take up the nutrient with it.
Tim, which white fertilizer are you referring to? I'm an organic gardener, so I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't know them.
No, but can you tell us?
It's usually white and soluble, like a white crumb.
And what is it, just nitrogen or what?
Yeah, it could be a number of makeup of different chemistry. And that's me.
We are definitely pacing in good time. So well done, speakers. You've done a fabulous job of actually getting us there. So some questions have actually come in, and I think that allows us to take a moment to actually talk about a few of these. So I'm going to put one to you, Ralph, just to think about for a minute. How many street sweepers in Canberra today compared to 10 or 25 years ago? We're going to circle back to that one because there's a couple here that I can actually answer it quite directly. Someone asked me, have you actually engaged with Brooke Clinton from Capital Scraps? And they also referred us to roving regenerators, who I have not heard of. But in the very first 6-week run, Brooke was actually the person who had the paid pickup service that we actually advertised. So when it was actually trialled in that particular region, we were working really closely with Brooke and her team as one of the people supporting us on ground who would potentially be able to get out there and do that. So these are the types of strategies that we've sort of been looking at, where people tell us we want it and what can we do it. Cheryl says she adopted her street, so congratulations, that's amazing. But she's quite overwhelmed by the leaf-laden gutters and just the level of what's going on in the street. So totally understand. And street parties or street events involving some sort of morning tea or barbecue are other ideas that are sort of on that long shopping list I've spoken about. Glennis asked, can we not produce the leaf bags in Australia? Believe you me, we spent weeks and months at the start of this year trying to source a supplier. We went looking for really environmentally friendly options. We were left in the end staying with the original bag that we'd found from the very first run. And the lucky people who've ordered bags most recently are getting bags twice the size as one mechanism as we're actually trying to compensate. So I would stand here in front of you all. If you know of someone who might have alternatives, please do reach out, because it is something that we've felt we could definitely do better. And we would just love to see something just maybe with that little leaf mark so that people just remember about it all. And then a final question I've got here, the next one's going to come to you, Tim, just as another heads up, is that we've been asked, how do the leaf towers work? And there are multiple ways you can use these leaf towers. You can use them to just hold and store the leaves so that when they're ready for your next run, you can put them as brown matter onto your compost. So composting has good ratios, and people talk about green versus brown, and there are certain ratios that work in different parts of the country really well, and possibly even within different regions. So some will say 1 part green, 2 parts brown, some say half and half. So you can either use your leaf tower to just have a beautiful holding bay. You could try what I did, which was to be the ultimate lazy gardener. Pack your leaf tower and then maybe stick some more stuff in it over time, because it does start to come down slowly. But basically just set and forget. And then 2 years later you come back and you think, oh, I probably should check that now. And you have the blackest, richest organic matter you've ever had in your life. The work has been done for you. So that is one way, if you don't feel like getting out there and turning it and working it and doing it to get it back really fast, you can, if you've got space, realise that over time. I also know some gardeners who can actually realise their compost in 60 to 90 days. So they've really studied it, they've worked really, really hard about how they can get it there fast. So there are a lot of wisdom. And again, some of the ideas indicated that we'd love to test as we go forward is some of these sessions where gardeners can get together, because sometimes that's the best way that we actually learn. So Tim, I said I'd give you the next question, so you're going to have to actually come up. How much blood and bone for the carbon? So they're actually back to the, how do we get that to break down faster?
I think that's more of a science question. I'm not really sure, but I know if there's a little sprinkle in there. So on a Canberra nature strip, I'd use maybe a quarter of a handful. So I reach into the bag and go, like, hold my hand really tight. Where's the camera? Hold my hand really tight, and then just make sure that lasts over the 20 or 30 steps along the nature strip. Yeah.
I'll just answer the question, Glennis. Where is Glennis? Hello, Glennis. On the street sweeping. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how much the street sweeping has changed over time. I'll make 2 points on this, though. Some of the research, again, you may or may not hear about, that is underway at the moment, is showing that the nutrients leach out of the grass and leaves really quickly if you wet it, right? And so the practical implication of that is that street sweepers would have to go around almost like garbage collectors and that kind of frequency in order to remove leaves and grass. So we will look into that and work with our TCCS colleagues on that and think about whether it's practical and whether it's affordable. Again, remembering this is public money, it's your taxes. The last point I'll make, that this is a reminder to me because I forgot to make it in my talk. We've been working with rural landholders for probably about the last 25, 40 years, trying to get them to not have nutrients and sediments enter streams from their properties, either due to over-fertilization or just, riparian zone being disturbed. The message with them, which has been, I think, personally, again, reasonable, is you shouldn't have, your operation shouldn't be polluting, right? We shouldn't have this weird situation where we have people polluting and then we say, oh, that's okay. The government will pick that up downstream at great cost using your taxpayer money. So this is the point, and I might get pointy with this, but I say this to all of us, whether it's the government or whether it's us as citizens. We shouldn't be polluting and then expecting the government using your money to try and figure out how to get that pollution out of the water. We should actually be, I think it's a civic responsibility to not pollute. And so that's what this is, part of what this is about. Now, I know you don't take the leaf from a tree and put it in the gutter. I'm not saying that any of you do that. Some people blow their leaves into the gutter, okay? So there is a little bit of active stuff there. So it's partly a passive thing, tree does that, partly an active thing, we blow it into the gutter. I'm just saying, as a community, I think we can uplift a little bit and solve the problem. And I know that you would agree, actually. Thank you.